Charlie 320.
Charlie 321.
Jordan.
350 to Delta 380.
The
Resident info.
a bit of room. Here's a good M and beard ring.
21 air 1 air 7 code 4.
Yeah, you can show me the OS and it's going to be a direct no.
350. Charlie 320.
Thank you for watching.
13 and victim 61. Delta 360, transporting one adult male to their stress.
Go to 3-6 transform, and when I don't know, I'll see you there on the streets.
Share the 817 canvas for 20. That's J.
Okay.
Core Medicaid Rescue 3, Medicaid Rescue 3. Rescue.
I'm gonna get a biscuit. I'm gonna get a biscuit. I'm gonna get a biscuit.
Call 22, David.
Help me too, David. Thank you and bye.
No, this lady, she's conscious breathing. I'm not seeing any injuries on her. Conscious breathing.
She's conscious breathing. I'm not seeing anything.
She got food.
Obviously, on hold the rescue too. 18 taking clear ID 70 or case 79 0079.
That's a 450 area.
She got food.
Okay.
Bravo.
Make it sexy. Of 16th, and there we have 6.5 analysis.
Close for hazmat 5. Hazmat 5, unknown EMS at 1022 Acacia Drive. 1022 Acacia Drive. ESC 5003 was found fire dispatch at 1023. Received.
I don't know. The woman's been walking around there in circles for days. I think she needs some mental
The
therapy.
total high spot prize has no prize for Anders at 1022 Occasion Drive. 1022 Occasion Drive. May be placed on full C2. Three of us from up to our disadvantage at 1023.
She usually makes a nest over there with garbage. I guess they ain't gonna do nothing to help the woman.
That number?
Apparently there's a deer carcass in the middle of White Cat. It's going to be 2.
We're all in there.
02 193. Leading 2 12493.
Hey, what time do it?
Guys, I'll show you. Speaking for team safety.
And over here.
Okay, she's on an RTA property. She's staying homeless.
A pen number.
Property beside it. We had a bus driver that's been up here for a few days, so she was just concerned for her. I just did a welfare check. Drink. She doesn't need any medical attention.
Well, damn, this is. She looks like she needs medical attention. I ain't gonna repeat what the bitch says to me right here.
South Florida, you could each have a unit.
Not in my mind. In fact, the last time she was out there for over a week till she fell over and she looked dead.
Okay, she's not an RTA property. She's staying. She's staying on the property. She's been out here for a few days, so she was just concerned for her. I just didn't want. You can use the other That was units. 40 years ago. Drink. She doesn't need any medical attention. Okay, especially if you want to stay in the lake.
Well, anyway, code enforcement's on my ass, but this is a reoccurring problem over here.
Bravo, 210. Yeah, but everything looks to be intact.
Then walks around in circles with invisible walls. And of course, this bitch probably thinks she.
Thank you for watching. I'll tell you around.
Rent a cop.
I don't know if I would be really sick.
78 for a fight.
Well, apparently they ain't gonna give her mental health services.
Yes, Metro.
No, people should not leave. I learned a weapon.
Person.
$245,903. That's how much the NOPD's highest overtime earner was paid overall in 2024, nearly $250,000, paid to Sergeant Henry Burke. To put that in perspective, as an NOPD police sergeant, Burke's regular salary is just more than $83,000 a year. But according to documents Fox 8 obtained, last year he rang up more in overtime than his base salary, $121,000 in OT. And he's not alone. In 2024, 23 NOPD officers clocked more in overtime than their base salary. The majority of those are senior police officers, like Brandon Coleman, who nearly tripled his $64,000 base salary with overtime. In all, Coleman collected more than $217,000 last year.
Follow the money. Follow the money. When you have officers, they start going over 160, 180, $200,000. It is extremely difficult to get there.
Forensic scientist and NOPD watchdog Skip Gallagher has been tracking NOPD overtime for years. He believes some officers on the force could be padding their timesheets.
The pay records scream this. They absolutely scream this. Every time an officer clocks over 200,000, if they're not in the command structure, we should have questions about them and what they're doing with their time.
Fox 8 took an in-depth look. On July 13th, our undercover camera captured Henry Burke getting into a vehicle at 2:54 p.m., then driving away 1 minute later. However, his timesheet that day indicated he clocked in nearly a half hour before that, at 2:30. Burke lives outside of Orleans Parish. A typical trip from his house to his NOPD station takes about 25 minutes. 2 days later, our camera captured Sergeant Burke returning home at 6:54 in the morning, 6 minutes before he clocked out of his shift. The next day, July 16th, Burke left his home at 3:02 in the afternoon, more than 30 minutes after clocking in for his shift. During an interview with NOPD Chief Ann Kirkpatrick last week, she indicated officers traveling home should not be on the clock.
What constitutes an officer off the clock? Is it when they get home, or is it when they leave?
No,
the
when
parish?
they leave, their duty hour has come to an end, they're off duty, and then they have take-home vehicles, so they drive home. They're not on duty while they're driving home.
On September 24th, our undercover camera captured Sergeant Burke loading a K-9 into a vehicle, then he pulled off at 2:55, again, nearly a half hour after he clocked in, and with at least a 25-minute drive ahead before he could arrive to his district for his more than 16-hour shift.
What disturbs me is that I have warned the department for more than 5 years that this is going on, and we still have this problem. You need to put credible resources towards fixing this problem.
Then there's senior police officer Brandon Coleman. Remember, Coleman nearly tripled his salary by working overtime last year, taking him from a base pay of about $64,000 to more than $200,000. According to NOPD payroll records, last year, on 146 different days, he claimed to work 16 hours or longer. Fast forward to July 22nd of this year. Coleman's initial timesheet indicated he worked a 16-plus hour shift from 6:25 in the morning until 11 that night. But our camera didn't capture him getting into his unit until 10:08 a.m., hours after he clocked in that day. The next day, he's clocked in for what he initially claimed was another 16-hour day on his timesheet, from 6:25 in the morning until 11 at night. But our video shows he didn't leave until 8:11 in the morning.
Camera.
Then on July 28th, Coleman discovered our undercover camera. Then, on July 29th, the next day, Coleman clocked in at 6:25 in the morning, but didn't leave his home until 7:41 a.m., more than an hour later. His NOPD SUV returns that evening at 6:37, but he didn't clock out until 7 p.m. The next day, nearly the same thing. Coleman clocked in at 6:25, but our camera showed he left more than an hour later at 7:48.
That is really disturbing, and it's really disturbing also, compounding the fact that we are in such a budget crisis and that every cent matters at this point. And so to see any level of abuse is incredibly disturbing and something that the chief has to handle.
New Orleans Mayor-elect Helena Moreno says the overtime questions Fox 8 raised should be addressed immediately.
There is no room for abuse. There's just not. And so any abuse that is discovered has to be absolutely cut out. I've had conversations with the chief about overtime. I've had conversations with the chief about whether there's potential abuse. I have directed her that she needs to handle this and take care of eliminating any type of abuse of overtime.
During an interview with Chief Kirkpatrick last week, she indicated the Office of the Inspector General is currently auditing overtime across the department.
As I said, look at all of us, do a report, give me names of people that you see are indiscretion. This is not a witch hunt, but it is truly to close this out. Let's change how we are documenting all of that. So I'm just looking for a clean bill of health here, and I think that's the best way to get to it.
A lot of times people want to focus purely on the numbers, which are important, but the morale is also really important. And so what you and then the other thing is you don't want a system of, well, I see these men or women getting away with it, so now I'm going to start doing it.
New Orleans City Council member Joe Geruso believes it's essential to have a clean payroll within the NOPD to ensure the best officers aren't driven away.
You want to make sure, A, people are following the rules. That's always the most important. But that B, if there is these overtime issues where you're pointing them out, that you have strong leadership taking that action where there are problems.
Gallagher believes the numbers should be enough to raise red flags and wants to see the department create genuine checks to ensure overtime isn't abused.
We don't have enough oversight. We really need to know, what is that officer doing for that overtime? Is it a positive thing? Are we getting something for our money? Because that overtime costs us a lot. And we need to know that we're getting something of value and they're actually doing something.
Moreno says even in the wake of a major city budget deficit, she understands overtime is a necessity and says while public safety is a top priority, the department must ensure its integrity isn't questioned because of unchecked overtime.
I told the chief she needs to get, a real handle on what's going on with overtime in her department. And obviously what you're bringing forward, she needs to look at and review and, verify independently that all is accurate.
We reached out to Burke and Coleman about our findings. Both declined to comment. We also asked for an interview with Chief Kirkpatrick to discuss our specific findings about the officers, but her communications team told us she's out of town. The OIG said its investigation into the NOPD's overtime policies is ongoing, writing in a statement, "We will continue to identify and mitigate fraud, waste, and/or abuse relating to city payroll, including NOPD overtime policies, procedures, and usage." Back to you.
company. In 1980, they had 1,040,000 employees, including 7,400 Smiths, 5,880 Johnsons, 3,934 Williamses. Over 70% of American households had a telephone. 80% of those telephones came from the Bell system. 90% of the local calls made on those telephones were facilitated by an AT&T affiliated company. And almost 100% of the long-distance calls were handled by AT&T itself using its majestic nationwide network. How does such a company end? In today's video, we take the mightiest corporation the modern world has ever seen. I don't want to hear any meme comments about the East India Company, and break it up. By the 1930s, it was clear that AT&T had no credible competition. After the fundamental Alexander Graham Bell patents expired in the early 1890s, dozens of non-Bell affiliated or independent telephone companies popped up to wire up their local areas. By 1902, there were 4,000 such companies. At first, people welcomed the competition. They did not like AT&T's imperial attitude and seemingly high prices, and the government saw a monopoly as socially inefficient. However, the chaos of competition soured people, and where did that bring them? Right back to AT&T. Over the 1910s and 1920s, AT&T was allowed to acquire or interconnect those independents, who were often glad to sell out. A new market structure emerged where smaller telephone companies, the Bell operating companies, part owned by AT&T, handle local telephone monopoly networks. Meanwhile, AT&T itself runs the single long-distance network connecting them all. Together, the local and long-distance networks are the Bell system. By 1934, the independents had 21% of the market, mostly just rural areas. The U.S. allowed this. In return, AT&T agreed to submit itself to government oversight, the beginning of a long and unhappy relationship. Over time, a regulation regime evolved. In 1934, the U.S. government set up the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, which took over for the relatively impotent ICC. The FCC held jurisdiction over the interstate networks. State and local public utility commissions regulated their own local telephone networks, setting rates to guarantee a reasonable rate of return while providing good, universal service. And to be honest, for a long time, the telephone service itself worked fine. For decades, people generally acknowledged that the rates and profits were acceptable, albeit premium, and the service was good, especially compared to the world's other networks. It was all the other stuff that AT&T did or tried to do that bothered people. America and Americans were and never will be comfortable with a monopoly, especially one of this size, metastasizing within their borders. One thing that the American government never liked about AT&T was its vertical integration. Unlike other telephone companies like those abroad in Europe, AT&T owned its own telephone and telecommunications equipment supplier, Western Electric. AT&T also owned the country's largest private research laboratory, Bell Labs. Back in its heyday, Western Electric was a consumer electronics giant in its own right, kind of like a General Electric, making typewriters, vacuum cleaners, radios, and more. But after the acquisition, they would only serve AT&T and the U.S. military. In 1967, Western Electric made $3.5 billion in revenue, which equates to about $33 billion today. Of that, $3 billion came from AT&T and the military for the rest. By 1979, Western Electric made $11 billion, or $47 billion today, and they employed a staggering 150,000 people, which was a seventh of AT&T's total workforce. When AT&T's corporate predecessor, American Bell, acquired Western Electric during the days of its patent monopoly, they were not really thinking about the vertical integration advantages of having their own equipment manufacturer. But Western Electric proved to be a formidable asset, the engineering glue and manufacturing muscle of the overall Bell system. Western Electric, Bell Labs, and AT&T, with the Bell operating companies, were all intimately linked together. AT&T funded and drove the product R&D development agendas at Western Electric and Bell Labs. Western Electric systems engineers bridged teams to integrate Bell Labs' inventions into products, and Bell Labs, in turn, set up R&D labs right inside Western Electric factories. The best example of the power of this integration occurred after Bell Labs invented the first transistor in 1947. The device was first mass-produced in a Western Electric factory in Allentown. There, the quality control guru Bonnie Small led the movement to apply statistical techniques to improve product quality. Under her tenure, over 5,000 quote-unquote control charts were produced to monitor process data for deviations during manufacturing. Members of the U.S. government have long been suspicious of Western Electric's close relationships with AT&T, and competing telecommunications equipment makers grumbled about being shut out of a massive market despite having what they feel is better and cheaper stuff. AT&T and Western Electric disagreed with that, of course, arguing that their equipment was well priced and quite good. And I think most people concur that Western Electric made very high quality product, meant to last for decades. During the 1930s, Holmes Baldridge served as an investigator for the FCC investigating AT&T, but he then moved to the Justice Department, and there he convinced Attorney General Tom Clark to launch a 1949 lawsuit against AT&T. The lawsuit accused the company of using its captive telephone monopoly to also monopolize the telephone equipment market for unfair profit. The lawsuit sought to break off Western Electric from AT&T and split it into 3 companies. This is where the politics get involved. As I mentioned, Western Electric was a major defense contractor, operating nationally important facilities like Sandia Laboratories. Shortly after the Korean War broke out in 1950, the Defense Department intervened, asking the Justice Department to freeze the lawsuit for the sake of the war effort. And of course, the Justice Department complied. Then after that, in 1953, AT&T lobbied the incoming Dwight Eisenhower administration, telling them that breaking up Western Electric would disrupt its deep involvement in national defense projects during the Cold War, like the distant early warning line of radar systems in the Arctic. The Eisenhower administration agreed with AT&T and asked them to submit their own concessions. In June 1954, they did, and thus we have the 1956 consent decree that let AT&T keep Western Electric and Bell Labs at the cost of being unable to compete in any industry other than telecommunications. The company also had to sell their interest in Canada's Northern Electric, which later became Nortel. Hope those guys are doing good now. Famously, the consent decree required that AT&T license out its patented technology innovations at a reasonable rate to third parties, even competitors.
320K? I'll be clear, folks.
Mike.
Bye.
G503.
G513.
Not a 460 referendum.
Thank you for your time. Do
That's fine.